Seeing the light, a quest to heal, not hustle. I've always been a thinker, the kind who can't let a problem sit without picking it apart. Lately it's been light. Blue light screwing with our sleep, red light promising to patch us up. Not the sexy stuff, not the quick buck scams. I'm not here to cash in, I'm here to heal. Therapy's busted, overpriced, overstretched, and that meta study showing it's possibly a net negative for some hit me hard. People deserve better, and I've spent years teaching myself how to find it, chasing real answers through books, social media threads, and late night tinkering. It started with screens. I'd stare at my laptop till 2 a.m., eyes fried, sleep shot. Dug into it. Blue light, 4 to 450 nanometers, suppresses melatonin, messes with your circadian rhythm. Studies from sleep journals backed it up. Markets a circus. $20 online glasses that might as well be toys, or $150 plus bon charge pairs acting like they're the cure-all, the panacea. I didn't want to join the grift. I wanted something that worked, affordable, honest. Self-directed learning kicked in. Scoured the optics sites, learned about filtration curves, found lenses blocking 90% of the bad stuff for $10 a pop, frames for $20. So that's at $50 to $70, you could sell them without gouging. Throw in a site that explains why your brain's wired after scrolling, not for profit, but for people. Then red light grabbed me. I'd read about it, 620 to 850 nanometers, boosts mitochondria. And the script leaves out that too much blue keeps us from getting red. It's an interesting little, what would you call it, research rabbit hole to fall down. So, but more importantly, this red light, it boosts the mitochondria, heals skin, cuts soreness. So someone with a, well, not just a skin disease, but inflammation and chronic pain, well, geez, that sounded like exactly what I'm looking for, an actual panacea. So science checked out, from photomedicine papers to biohacker forums, but the gear, $300 to $700 panels, that's US. So in Canadian, that's about $5,000 or $6,000. Who's that for? The tech bros with trust funds? I couldn't stomach it. I've got agency, don't need some company to spoon feed me. I hit the web, priced out LED strips, 660 nanometers and 850 nanometers, $20. Power supplies to $10, easily. Boards from Home Depot, $10. Wood's gotten expensive. It might be cheaper to go with something else. But wired up, tested out, works perfect, right? Rough but real. Bought a cheap 40-watt panel, like as an experiment too, just to see if something pre-made from the store. I mean, no problem. Took it apart, see how simple it was. Anyone could make this for themselves, but easily they could be made for $50 and be everything that the $600, $700 ones are. Healing, not hustling, right? That wasn't some business school brainstorm. It was me, years of bouncing between economic texts, supply, demand, utility, and biology, PDFs on lights, cellular tricks, but philosophy as well. Social media posts, burnt out coders and gym rats pointed me to the need. DIY forums showed me the how. Therapy's failure lit a fire. People aren't getting fixed by $200 sessions, dragging on for a decade. Blue light blocks the damage. Red light rebuilds what's broken. Together, it's therapy you can touch. Glasses for $60, a red light kit for $50, maybe $100 bundled. No middleman, no hype, just a site with the why and how. Here's what light does. Here's how to use it. I'm not chasing whales or VC checks. I've seen Bone Charge push sales over substance. Watched cheapo glasses scam the desperate. It's not me. Taught myself this. Wavelengths, wiring, what healing really means, because I hate seeing people stuck. Light's universal. Screens are everywhere. Recovery is a human need. My garage rig's no prototype for a startup. Trust me, but it's proof we can fix ourselves without getting fleeced. Blue and red, shield and repair for the masses. That's the solution I found, not for my wallet, but for us. And really, the script leaves out, it's being an agent in your healing. For so long, I felt lost, forgotten. I mean, I think so often PTSD and healing comes from this. Right? Even my doctor said, well, there ain't much more we can do, because he was healing symptoms. But what I've realized even recently, agency helps. For me, what's difficult is I can react even 72 hours after having something or being exposed to something, so it's really tough to know what you need to eliminate. It forces you to have to eliminate everything, but even then, when you add things back, it can take you years to add back everything that you know you might eat. Like for me, I haven't eaten tomatoes in years. Right? But the takeaway is agency. So even if you're uncertain, I've talked about this, agency, being certain about your path, right? This is what religio means. It's the path you follow with devotion and commitment. And from that flows conviction. Your trust in your path gives you not certainty, but it gives you, well, like I said, a sense of hope in agency. And that's the biggest thing I'd like to teach as someone who was legitimately legitimately left behind for so many different reasons, right? I've come to realize that in that ostracization, did I say that right? I find myself the solution to, I mean, it's so funny. It's literally the archetype. It's Nietzsche's hermit from his Also sprach Zarathustra. It's this idea that if we have someone that goes away from society and ends up figuring out something that might help us in some way, don't rebuke them, because, well, as Nietzsche said, you might as well end them because they won't come back. And that's what we've come to realize. I talked a lot about how we are encouraging narcissism and we're discouraging the opposite, openness. But I've come to realize, right, it's what Nietzsche said in his Flies of the Marketplace. Right? All new ideas are denatured by the flies in the marketplace. And this is the same thing here. I talked about Huberman and Palmer. I've been inspired by, is it Chris Palmer? Just don't trust my memory. But he wrote the book Brain Energy, and he just did an interview yesterday with Andrew Huberman. And it was fantastic, but see, they dropped the ball because they talked about methylene blue, and they left the impression that you could take aquarium methylene blue, which was a failure. I understand why. They're just afraid to tell people that there is a version for consumption, even though they admitted it's been shown to be helpful in medicine. But they wouldn't talk about dosing and yet mention how dangerous it is to take too much, or it wouldn't help if you take too little. So really, it's a fear of being called a conspiracy theorist or pseudoscience. Right? This is what I ran into when I first started healing this. Everyone with my disease were obsessed with pseudoscience. And in fact, I messed up a little bit because they were sharing homeopathic stuff and just crazy stuff. Like, for example, like supplement with borax, because the problem you have a chronic illness is because there isn't enough boron in the soil anymore. So you're not getting it from your fruits and vegetables. So supplement with borax. But I screwed up because then when they shared a functional doctor, which I have seen many that are just loons, but in recent years, I have to admit I was wrong, because there could have been back then ones that were good, because there are some good functional doctors today, ones that are open-minded and don't realize that the path is one or the other, right? It's not with us or against us, right? It's a middle path, right? The world is gray, not black and white. But I was seeing things as black and white, and so I got very upset with them sharing a functional doctor. But this was, again, my overreaction, because I was turned into a very reactive monster. because of how I was treated. I told you I was kicked out of a group once just for suggesting there might have been a diet connection to chronic illness. Imagine. But here we are, right? The solution is simple. And once again, it's education and agency. And we need to think for ourselves. And we need to keep in mind that we're not trying to reduce symptoms. We don't just want to survive. We want to thrive. So we need to heal the source of these symptoms. And so often today, it seems it might just be something like meaning. Because even with my disease, who was it? I learned recently that a famous actor, because he had so many injuries, lived with chronic pain, and he actually taught himself to rewire himself and have a new relationship with pain. Right? And I saw that this morning with myself. I was pouring some hot water and a whole bunch of it splashed on my hand, and I just went, oh, the skin was burned, right? It's all red and stuff, but you get a different experience with pain. But I've seen the opposite side, right? If pain can be 80% mental, I gotta warn people, there's many people who are making themselves suffer psychologically. I actually call it PSIRS, Psychological Systemic Inflammatory Response Syndrome. Part of this whole thing that, we can visualize things into being, especially when it comes to chronic pain and anxiety, depression. And I know it sounds like a derailment here, but this is what this book was about. Dr. Chris Palmer's book, Brain Energy. This idea of the mitochondria is the heart of so much of our chronic illness. He's a psychiatrist, so he's stuck to mental health, but it's all that you cannot separate. It's called Gestalt. There's no separating the body, the mind, and I include the soul. Even if you just look for a purpose and meaning, that I think could satisfy the soul, but that's also missing today. But that's the heart of the bleeding edge of science here. These aren't pseudoscience doctors, and they're being very careful so they don't get categorized as such, right? A Harvard professor worried about saying too much about a medicine that's been used for over 100 years, but right? Let's not go there. Like I said, I was ostracized for suggesting maybe there might be food that you're reactive to. Whoa, right? Imagine. But it looks like it's coming down to mitochondria, and something that I call the mitochondrial immunoinflammatory axis, right? Because it's stress, it's cortisol, it's hormones, it's literally everything. It's what I've been saying. If you've been listening to my podcast, it's 6 years, it's going to be 7 actually, in a few months, I think. But I've been harping on this forever. I talk that Buddhism is just a way to heal this trauma, and now I've come to realize trauma is, yes, experience, but it's also health. It's also, well, so much else. So I've come to realize the Gestalt is true. The Tantric Buddhist idea is true. There is no separation of body, mind, soul, spirit, self, others. But you can't separate what you eat and how you think and how you live from your health and your welfare. And yet this seems to be ridiculous. I told you my doctor, who had to retire unannounced, an emergency. I can't remember the words they used, but they had to call me and say, oh, he just retired. So I couldn't even see him one last time. No warning, no nothing. He's just gone. But he laughed at me when I suggested the microbiome was important to health and healing, especially with inflammation and allergies. He laughed at me at first, and then he was like, I'm all in. He told me there was nothing he could do for my HS for over 10 years. But then when I went into the hospital, because I had an abscess so bad I couldn't walk, couldn't sit, nothing, I had to get it drained. Usually it would drain on its own. Very painful process. Imagine me, I used to wear black all the time because I'd always be bleeding. But I had to get it drained, and because I was in so much pain, not from the abscess, I was in pain from just moving, right? I had bone pain, muscle pain, and joint pain, you name it. It was horrible because I really didn't know where I was at. I was fighting inflammation at the time, but I didn't realize it was everything. Diet, lifestyle, and allergies, stress, all of it combined. But first you have to deal with your trauma. Otherwise you can't even deal with your emotional regulation. I'm just beginning to be able to deal with that. But I lucked out because there was, and here's the argument for lady doctors, because I've seen doctors for 20 years, and I finally got a lady doctor, and she felt so bad for me because the pain I was in. She got me a consult with a dermatologist and x-rays and ultrasound because she thought there was something very serious. But, right, that's how they knew I had HS. Between the abscesses and my skin lesions and all of the evidence, plus the pain, the inflammation, all this jazz. Well, I mean, that's how I was able to be diagnosed. Mostly on my own, talking about inflammation. But again, the most tragic part here again is because I'm dyslexic, and because at that time, 8, 10, 15 years ago, whatever it was, when someone told me the name of the disease, they didn't pronounce it properly, I don't think, and it took me a while to find it. But when I finally found it online, it was like, wow, imagine. But the tragedy here is when I went back to my doctor after having someone else diagnose me, then he's like, oh yeah, no, I have other HS patients and I've been treating them for, oh yeah. But yet you told me there was nothing more you could do for me, right? So that's when I showed him what I've been dealing with, because he didn't, and it gets worse, because he didn't really, take it that serious. Well, at the time, I actually had a sinus tract. What that means is multiple spots are interconnected. So multiple abscesses have been interconnected, and they've actually created a tunnel through your skin or your tissue, to try to expectorate, the inflammatory and everything else that goes on. It's gross, I know, but so it was actually coming out of, a personal area, if you understand what I mean. And I showed him this, that it was bleeding and expectorating all the time, pretty badly. And told him also that we couldn't use Band-Aids and gauze. I mean, how would you? So I was using Band-Aids, bandanas, as bandages, right? And he was so shocked. I got a referral to a dermatologist in only a few weeks. And this is Canada. When I called around on my own, it was over 2 years wait. So he got me in quick. I wonder now that I've learned so much, I think maybe he was worried about a malpractice suit of some kind, because he let me suffer for over a decade, when he should have actually have done the work to figure it out. But that's neither here nor there. I don't really blame him for that. But what's worse is when I went to the dermatologist, they gave me a flyer, telling me about my disease. So as I was waiting in the waiting room, right? Again, I'd already been diagnosed. Nobody did anything, and it gets worse. So I'm reading, and it was talking about the Hurley stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, right? So if you have HS and you just have, abscesses here and there, you're stage 1. If you have interconnecting abscess, what they call sinus tracts, well, then you're stage 2. And I'm not sure the difference between stage 2 and 3, but definitely you're not stage 1 if you have sinus tracts. Definitely stage 2. And so finally I get in to see this dermatologist. He doesn't even look at my skin. I got no examination whatsoever. And he says he diagnosed me with HS. And worst of all, he's like, well, you can't be disabled, because he had so he doesn't know anything about me. Didn't ask me a single question. And he assumes, because why I was there was because the Revenue Canada didn't believe I was sick. They thought I was working under the table. So I hoped that my diagnosis of one of the worst skin diseases you can have, inflammatory diseases you can have, might make them think, oh, okay, between his severe dyslexia and the world having gone digital, and his horrible chronic illness, maybe he isn't working under the table. That was my hope, but he told me, oh, how could you be disabled? He didn't even ask. But what's worse is he diagnosed me as having HS without examining me at all, and diagnosed me as HS stage 1. Without even looking at my body. So I said, what are you doing? I pulled down my pants and I showed him just a couple of my abscesses with sinus tracts. Right? And so I made him redo the letter. He just did it by hand instead of stage 3. But so he screwed me. He really did. Right? This is government being paid for this. And it was, again, malpractice. How can a dermatologist diagnose me with a skin disease without ever looking at my skin? That's disgusting. But this is what I'm saying, right? Agency. Because I said, well, to heck with you then. Obviously, I am able to figure this out as much as the next guy. And lo and behold, thanks to extensions that allowed me access to PubMed and the National Institute of Health and all this other stuff, right? In fact, it saved my life and my wife's, because I actually early on went to the College of Immunology and Allergy, I think is what it's called. And they actually told us that we shouldn't take advice from somebody at a pharmacy or at an arena handing out pokes, that we should talk to an allergist or an immunologist. Because, again, my doctor told me not to be worried about it, in spite of the fact of my severe allergies. And the black box warning on that poke was, if you have an inflammatory condition, be careful. So when he told me that the poke jockeys in an arena would give me medical advice, that was the last time that I took advice. From then on, I became an equal partner in my healing, an agent in my healing. In fact, what ended up happening, which is hilarious, my doctor had been so long, when I came back, he's like, "Oh, are you still playing with the veganism thing?" And I said, "No." I said, "I realized I needed my, I can't remember exactly what, acetylcholine. Don't quote me on that, but it was something in particular that I was noticing, but just in passing." And I mentioned that, and he's like, "Oh yeah, wow, you know a lot about this stuff." He's like, "You should should write a book, especially about the healing with the HS." But even worse, the last time I went back, this doctor put me behind by almost 5 years by telling me that mast cell is not on a spectrum. You're either dysfunctional or normal. Same with histamine intolerance. I called it histamine sensitivity. But he said, no, that's not a thing. It's not on a spectrum. But lo and behold, I was 100% right. Part of my issue is mast cell issues, histamine, which I told you before, I've solved by drinking, not solved, but it's helped by drinking mint tea all day, something that no doctor knows. They tell people to eat pea shoots all day, not mint tea. Much better option, mint tea, because you're hydrating and you're getting a constant supply of DAO, diamine oxidase, which downregulates histamine. So does the mitochondria, and see how this is all tied together. But because we have forced all of our doctors and our scientists and even our philosophers to specialize so much, they miss all of this, right? Because the last time I went into my doctor and told him about the mast cell, he's like, "Wow, you know more about this stuff than I do." Right? And so we talked about going on a second level of what they call second generation antihistamines, which are much better, right? Because he finally learned that I can't be taking Benadryl because if it messes with my microbiome and makes me tired. So I told him what I wanted. He recommended Blexten, which he's given to me before. I told him it messed with my microbiome, but I fought through it, took a half dose of it, and it helped. It really did help with a number of my symptoms. But he told me the Blexten was just for itching. He never told me any other potential. But this next time I came in, I told him about that, and I didn't want Blexten again because it was so expensive and blah, blah, blah. I said, I looked up this another one called Sertrazine, and I can just get it generic in Walmart. Sadly, Canada, not everything is available over-the-counter generic. I said, can I try this to see? And he's like, "Oh, well, I don't know." But he's like, "Yeah, go ahead." And I tried it, and it was good. It did better job than Blexten as far as my allergies, my skin, my itching and stuff. But it made me very tired. Even though it's the second generation, I still found it made me tired. And then at the half dose just wasn't killing, the same thing. It didn't seem worth it. So I stopped taking the Sertrazine. Called the doctor. Well, I wanted to stop taking the Sertrazine. Called the doctor, and he had mentioned a couple other, because he said he knew the second generation, all the different allergies, and he told them, and this is again, as my dyslexic self, I just remember him saying it, right? So, and it's lucky because it was a pretty easy one to remember. He said the commercial name, not the what would you call it, the actual name. So it was memorable, right? But he just gave it in a list, and it didn't explain what was special about it. So I started going through all of the second generation of antihistamines. And this one stood out, Rupall. Also because the neighbor mentioned she was on Rupall. Again, something that made it front of mind. And it's Rupatadine. And I went and looked it up. And what's even funnier is I went and asked, when I was waiting to see my doctor that last time, I went into the pharmacy and I was, asking the pharmacist. She said she didn't mind asking her some questions about the second generation of antihistamines and the difference between the two of them. And she just doesn't understand. She really doesn't. She just wouldn't admit that she's not familiar. Right. And in fact, my doctor fell for the same. He just wouldn't admit, because when I was asking him, so we've already figured out that I'm going to go on the second generation antihistamines, but I asked him about something called an H2 antihistamine. And he's like, I don't know what that is. Do you know what it is? It's like Prilosec. It's like so histamine is produced in two ways. One, the regular antihistamines we used to know as Benadryl. The modern ones are, I can't remember the commercial names, but there's a number of them that aren't supposed to be as drowsy because they don't cross the blood-brain barrier as efficiently or whatever they explain it, right? So for me, the Sertrazine obviously crosses the blood-brain barrier more than this Rupall, right? Because I asked him after researching it, and this Rupall says that it has an additional benefit. It's something called a PAF. What would you call it? Down regulates the PAF, the platelet activating factor. Absolutely. If you'd read anything about the action and the Rupatadine, no one studied it yet, this additional PAF with Rupatadine. But if you know my disease, if you know I have autoinflammatory, I have an autoimmune, I have allergy, I have all of this, then 100% you should have realized that Rupall or Rupatadine with its PAF factor would make a huge difference. But here's where we win. So I don't know if my doctor was already sick and not there and they just didn't. But when I called up and I said, okay, so I've done the experiment, I took Sertrazine for whatever, and it makes me too little, so I'd like to try something else. And the doctor gave me a list of different ones, and he recommended, and I lied, and I said he recommended the Rupall. He didn't. He just gave me a list. I said, and I think he recommended it because of this additional PAF factor that it has within it. I said, could I get a prescription? And they just absolutely. And, they faxed it to Costco where I get my prescriptions. And here's what's fantastic, because I think he is relying on me, because he didn't fax it in as everyone sees Rupatadine as a 10 milligram a day dose, but he faxed it to Costco at 1 to 2 pills a day. That tells me he knows what he was thinking, because he knew for me, I needed possibly more than the 10. So I started my experiment, and I took 10 milligrams for about a month, 2 weeks or more. Sorry, not a month, but it was more than 2 weeks. But then I started to get super tired, and I stopped. But I figured out what it was. It's what you call the half-life. Right? So I started with 10 milligrams alone, and it was good, but it didn't really get me all there. So I tried 2. I forgot. That's why I said a month. So I tried 1, for a while, maybe a month, and it just wasn't getting me there. So then I tried 2 a day, and I only got a few weeks before, the half-life of the pill got to me. I ended up having too much in my system, right? 20, 30, milligrams. Because it builds up, right? After 24 hours, you still have I think it's 6 milligrams of a 20 milligram dose in your body. So, I think he is on my side with this. But here's what's crazy. What I realized is it's not an either or. Here's where my multidisciplinary approach and having an open mind to this stuff is. Right? It's not 10 milligrams. It's not 20 milligrams. Even AI recommended maybe taking 10 milligrams of Rupatadine and 5 milligrams of Sertradine. But what I've gone and figured out is playing with the half-life of Rupatadine, something that every doctor should be thinking about. So I figured out about how well I metabolize it based on that 2 weeks when it got a little too much, which told me I'm about a 15-hour guy, meaning some people can burn out 50% of Rupatadine in 6 hours. I'm more of a, closer to a 15-hour. I'm being on the outside window here because I did the math. And if I take Rupatadine, my antihistamine, once a day on odd days and twice a day on even days, that ends up giving me pretty much a level 15 milligrams throughout as much as possible. Right? And what I do is I take one first thing in the morning, my second one at night, and the following day when I take one Rupatadine, I take it around noon. because I was taking the searches and it didn't seem to help all that much with, the itching and some of my other symptoms. Right? In fact, I've added some other supplements in creatine. If anybody's got atopic dermatitis or any sort of skin issue, honestly, anything with inflammation and immune, I recommend supplementing with creatine because my skin has not been better in years, right? And the allergy pills weren't helping that much with my skin disease, which makes it terribly confusing to try to figure all this out, right? But so there you go. So in the end, every single experience that I've had showed me the only way to survive it was to have agency. You be the person in charge of this. Whereas I see almost everyone when it comes to health, they're just listening to their doctor or their nurse or their healthcare provider or their pharmacist, and they're not thinking about any of this. Like, I had an experience when I was young. We would have lost my grandmother when she was only in her mid-70s. Because the doctor had her on 2 medications that conflicted. Right? And nobody, the doctor, the nurses, the pharmacist, nobody went, hey, no. But I digress. I'm sorry. Thank you. Have a great day.